In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Amen. The third Sunday of Advent is Rejoice Sunday. So welcome to Rejoice Sunday. It's called Rejoice Sunday because the first word of the liturgy on this particular Sunday was always the Latin word gaudete. Now, I preached the sermon last year and I said we can't bring the Latin into the sermon, right? But we have the kids here in just a few minutes, right here, it's going to be singing their song for us. And they're going to be teaching us that word. So I'm like, if the kids know it, then we should know it as well. And that Latin word, gaudete, means rejoice. In both of our more penitential seasons, both Advent and Lent, there are always breaks. Times when serious reflection fades somewhat into the background. Just somewhat. These are times when one gets a little breather. And at least in Advent, what becomes most important is the focus upon the joy that Christ will soon bring. That's why we light the rose-colored candle today, the one there in the black. It's struggling a little bit this morning, but it's doing okay. The one that's halfway between the normal color of Advent, which is purple, or at Holy Trinity it's more blue, and the full white of Christmas blessing. It's the one that sort of stands in the middle. It's a recognition why that Christ is not fully here as of yet, there is still reason to rejoice. It's a strange thing, though, to read our gospel passage this morning on this Rejoice Sunday. It's not one that I would have chosen. And for me to admit that, it's probably a good indication that I probably need to focus in a little more clearly into what our lectionary is doing during this Advent season. It's a season that prepares us, for the coming of Christ. And it does it bit by bit. And the gospel passage, this gospel passage, examines the human condition. And like with a scalpel, it peels away at a malady that affects the human condition, our ability to experience fully the joy that Christ brings. The gospel, in fact, begins with John the Baptizer in a seeming rage. I mean, he's calling folks a brood of vipers and spouting off about a wrath to come, and forecasting a day when an axe will cut down those who don't produce good works. I'm just going to admit it this morning. It doesn't sound very Episcopalian. To put in the words of a dear Episcopalian and president that we just recently lost, it's just not prudent. Ranting and raving like this, John sounds more like a Baptist. Now, I kid the old Baptist because I used to be one. So if you used to be one, you're allowed to kid them a little bit. But they did have a tendency to get all out of sorts from time to time in their preaching. Because it's the most important thing they do in a worship service, they have to get all worked up. And that's why I'm a good old Episcopalian. If this sermon stinks this morning, well, at least you've got the creed, the prayers, and most crucially, the Eucharist from which to get a blessing. It reduces my anxiety level just a smidge. Because it's not about my performance or my ability to persuade you. Our worship revolves around more than just a sermon. Our worship is principally about meeting God at the altar. But at first blush, we might conclude that John's rather interesting oratory sort of puts the focus on himself. There he is, ranting and raving. But when we really examine what's going on here in Luke, beyond just the surface level, it's clear that what John the Baptizer is doing in his preaching, he's taking the focus off of man. And he's putting in man and his standing or his ability. And putting the focus upon God and his providential will. The big theological terms here are anthropocentric, human-centeredness, versus theocentric, God-centeredness. John challenges the crowd gathered around him with the most foundational question. What is at the center of your life? A human-centeredness or a God-centeredness? And John uses some very strong imagery to do so. The brood of poisonous vipers, the dumb stones that are just sitting there on the ground, the axe that lies at the foot of the tree, providing much fear because the axe has the power to cut it down and to destroy it. These images are tools in John's woodshed that he oratorically uses in order to get people's attention, to send a strong and clear message that it's not all about them, that a life of joy is a life with God at its center. And eventually he'll use his own creative skills on himself as the people's growing assumption that this might be the Messiah talking to us. And John wants to put that assumption to rest. As he tells the crowd, he paints another image. He says, I'm not even worthy to untie the thong of his sandal. The sandal that the Messiah will wear. The true Messiah that will come. I mean, the true issue here, the real issue that John is confronting, is humans trusting in themselves. And by trusting in themselves, they place themselves at the center of their own constructed universe. And more specifically, in this particular case, it's humans trusting in their own standing. You know by now that these folks that John is preaching to are a pretty religious crowd. They are Jews who have heard from the first minutes of their births that they are indeed special. The rest of the pagan world would not agree, and these Jews will face much tribulation. For most of their lives, or all of their lives, they will live under Roman occupation. But this will be for them an everyday reminder the outside world rejects them. But what it also creates, though, is inside this culture is this resolve, this strong, steadfast determination that God's favor is upon this particular people. It'll be passed down from generation to generation, this value we taught from a very young age, that the rest of the world may regard us as less than, that we have favor where it really counts. God has favor upon us. That we have this rich heritage that stretches from our birth in Abraham to our salvation under the leadership of Moses, continue on into our domination under King David, and even now into the present era, in the first century. It's our people who have this abiding significance, since it's from out of us the future Messiah will soon come. We are special indeed. Human being though what it is, human nature being what it is, this divine favor that God has placed upon this people will soon turn into entitlement. Simply because we are the children of Abraham. We are the favored ones, with an unbreakable inheritance of faith. You see, faith became mechanical. Not something that needs to be lived out within a real animating relationship, but something we can take for granted. And we can take it for granted because it will always be there. For it was granted to us unconditionally in past history, and it can never be taken away. We are entitled to it simply because of who we are. Now don't get me wrong, these folks, they're a worshiping kind of people. In fact, they have a whole institution of synagogue worship established with all of its ornate and beautiful liturgy. This isn't a secular culture in which worship is merely an option. No, it's a vital part of their lives, who they are personally and communally. And when a prophet like John comes along, it's that these folks go out and they support this prophet. They follow him around all over the place, hearing his wise teachings. But despite all the ways that these folks appear to be faithful to the wise ways of God, it's John the Baptizer, the great prophet sent by God to prepare the way for the coming of Christ, the Messiah. It's John who will confront them. His words lift the veil and reveal what's really lurking in the background of their lives. For faith is not to be found in just some parts of your life. Faith is to be found in every dimension of it. And having Abraham for an ancestor or being in a certain family is not the same thing as having a true faith. True faith is lived out. Lived out in the giving of mercy to those who have no coat or no food. Lived out in being honest, even when being even when having a lack of integrity could give you an advantage in your life. Live down and using your power wisely. We all have power. Using your power wisely to build up rather than to tear down. This is the tree of life that not only grows itself, but provides oxygen for all those around it. And when you spend time with someone who just has the joy of life, it's almost like oxygen. Sometimes we refer to these kinds of folks as carefree. But some of the most joyful people in life carry tremendous amounts of responsibility. They shoulder many cares. But they possess a way of migrating through life, grounded in something that's more important than self. Something fundamental that reminds them that their duties on earth are sacred. And in a pluralistic society that we live in, there's all sorts of these different kinds of groundings. It could mean all sorts of different kinds of things. But for the Christian, for the one who looks to the inspired Christian scriptures, for wisdom, for a way of migrating through life's difficulties, that grounding is in God's providential will. It's trusting in Him. Trusting not in some heritage that you were born into or some privilege that's been given to you or you're inherited, but trusting in God's goodness. And that goodness is poured out in God's work. It's, shall we say, lived out. It's lived out in what we call His providential will. Providence is God's spiritual care for you. It's a belief that things don't just happen arbitrarily or randomly, but according to God's special care. Bad, horrible, no good, even evil things are not outside of God's care. How all that works involves an awful lot of mystery, and it's probably best suited for a different kind of sermon than the one given this morning. But a belief in God's providence is trusting that God cares about me and has a real relationship with me, which provides true and lasting joy. It doesn't erase all the things that I don't like about my life, but it gives me a path to walk through those most difficult things. Being joyous isn't the same thing as being carefree. Being joyous is taking those cares and concerns and putting them in God's hands. And it's the reason why St. Paul in the reading this morning tells us not to worry about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God. For Paul, it's not so much a literal do not worry, as much as it is don't be controlled by worry. Be controlled instead by the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of Christ. And being controlled by Him will be evidenced in your life by the three different marks that are also given in that passage. Your gentleness toward others, your giving to God your cares and concerns through your prayers and your humility, and the peace that will guard your heart and mind. Gentleness, humility, and peace. Gentleness, humility, and peace. That's Paul's recipe for a joyous life. Joy tells the truth about what's inside of you. It tells the truth of whether you trust in God's special care for you or not. It's funny how this Sunday is called Rejoice Sunday. Paul exhorts us to rejoice. It's his main theme in Philippians. To rejoice is not merely to have joy or to experience it. To rejoice is to live out the joy that resides within you. Just as John was exhorting the crowd to live out your faith in action, rejoicing is to live out your joy, your gentleness, humility, and peace that you receive from God. To rejoice is an action, something we choose to do. To rejoice is to choose to show great delight in our God because we trust Him and we know that we receive from Him those gifts, those good gifts of goodness, humility, and peace. And we rejoice because of the choice He's made as well. He has chosen, He has willed to be near us, to see us, to hear us, to touch us by the presence of His Son and Spirit. The Church Father Irenaeus calls the Son and the Spirit God the Father's two hands. The Father has in love touched us by sending His Spirit and His Son. We are not who we are because of some standing or some position we have in society. All those things are sinking sand that we were washed away and the nature of life's change. We are who we are because God sent His Son to redeem us and His Spirit to teach us, to hear our cry and to save us. We rejoice because He is our salvation. And we are the true Israel. And so we take the song of Zephaniah as our song. Sing aloud and shout and rejoice and exult with all of your heart. The Lord has taken away His judgments against you. For the Lord is in your midst. We rejoice together in this third Sunday of Advent because the Lord is near. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.